Welcome everyone. I'm here today with Angelo Giuliano.
Hi, Jason.
Hello.
Hi.
Today we are going to talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict and what has been going on there. Angelo, could you start talking about how this whole thing developed? You know, the history and everything?
Yes, I think it's very important just to go back to history to understand the whole context. Why are we here having Palestinians and Israelis fighting for the land? And to my opinion, they share the same history and actually the same genetics too. You know, I think when we talk about Semitism. Semite, you know, it's Arab, it's people from the same region.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to look at the whole Zionist movement, how the Zionist movement started, and actually who are the Jews, who are the Palestinians, what are their roots. And I advise people just to read a book. There's a very interesting book called The Invention of Jewish People. But again, the title is provocative, but the writer is Tel Aviv professor. He's a Jew, and he's actually challenging the origin of the Jewish people. So the Jewish people have two types. There is the Sephardi, which are like more Arab looking, and they are the Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi, they come from the ancient Khazar Empire. So they don't come from the original 12 tribes. There were people that were around the Caspian Sea, you know, around Poland, you know, that area. And this is why they speak Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, back in the old days, they were pagans, and they had to convert into a religion, because pagans, they were in danger. You know, you had to choose. Back in the old days, you have to choose either for Christianity or Islam. You know, they were just in between. They needed to choose a religion, and what they chose, they did a compromise, and they chose Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So in reality, you have Ashkenazi, they account for around 80% of the Jewish people. So, and they are, so it's very interesting. So they are from Poland and that area, you know, from the Khazar Empire. So they don't have any roots from the land of Israel. So it's very interesting that people that are claiming always like 2000 history, and they're claiming to be from a certain land, which is very far and has nothing to do with their roots. They're claiming to be the owner of that land.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this part. So this is for the Jewish side. Then the Palestinians. What is interesting is that a lot of Palestinians were actually somewhere, you know, just locals there, you know, like Bedouins. But some actually were Jews that were converted into Islam. The reason was very simple. In the old days, it was much easier because of the huge immigration from the Arab, Saudi Arabia, and so on into Palestine. It was much better and safer, and probably I think it was a tax issue, tax related. The Muslims didn't have to pay taxes, so a lot of Jews actually converted into Islam, and they are actually a lot of Palestinians have probably Jews roots. So you see how.
Do you mean because Jews were only allowed to work in finance? That was at least in the Christian.
No. This is more.
Places.
I think it was more like a choice. Maybe proselytism. You know, probably they were pushing for people to convert into being Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the figures. There's not necessarily a figure, but there's a high probability that a lot of Palestinians actually have Jews roots.
Mm-hmm.
And then they are among the 80% of Ashkenazi. they don't have any roots to the real Jews that were living there 2,000 years ago. So you see how interesting it is. I think it's an embarrassment for both Jews and Palestinians. Imagine from, this theory, people from Hamas, that it would be an embarrassment for them just to think that they might have actually Jewish roots. And
could you just explain what Hamas exactly is? Because here in the West, they just portray it as a radical, probably Islamist movement because it has all Muslim writing over it, and they carry guns, and they do attacks against Israel. So we don't really know.
Well, I think it's very easy way to portray. Terrorism is the weapon of the weak. In reality, those people are. There's two branches. There's the one that are in power, Mahmoud Abbas, and then there is the Hamas, and there is a competition between them, on power. And Hamas is much more aggressive, while Abbas has been doing a lot of compromises with the US and Israel. So I just want to go back to a little bit of history. So what is interesting is that in the old days, you have to imagine that those people, Israelis and Palestinians, and Jews and Palestinians, they have been living side by side as brothers, and religions has never been an issue. In reality, this whole thing about the return to the land of Israel, it was actually going against the religion. There is a branch of ultra-Orthodox Jews that actually are strongly against the return to Israel because it goes against the religion and the Torah. So the Zionist movement was actually initiated by people that didn't even practice Judaism. They were, Ben-Gurion and so on. They were not. They were not like a Orthodox, So the Zionist movement is, and even the most radical are actually not there because of a religion, and in reality the Zionist movement started a long time ago, but there's something which is interesting is that in reality one of the most Zionists in history was actually, and it's a taboo, just there are facts there, but Hitler was one of the first ones to promote Zionism. But his reason was that he wanted to get rid of the Jews on German land.
To send them away.
So this is why he was actually pushing for having the Jews to move to Israel. But that is a taboo, and I have to say another thing is that, and I feel sad about this, there's a lot of things which are related to the Second World War, which we are not allowed to talk, and some subjects which are taboo, I think a lot of people, they try to portray people that are anti-Zionism to be anti-Semite, and I think those issues are completely different,
Yeah, definitely.
And then, going back to what I said just before, even Jews are not. It's a religion. It's not even, it's not even related to a race. And there are proofs for that. I'm quoting, scholars, Jewish scholars about this. But I think it's just a taboo, and I think we've been brainwashed a lot, there's this sense of guilt, because of course, I think the Holocaust is something which is terrible. But again, because of the Holocaust, I think it's a weapon that they use a lot against the Palestinians. And
what I've seen is that, Greens in Germany and the Social Democratic Party, basically all the liberals, they always say, well, never again wars. But when it's about the wars in foreign countries, in the Middle East and such, then they don't care. Then they completely don't care. So it's, they're just using more or less the Holocaust. And what I've also noticed is that they mostly just reduce it to, it was just the Jews. No, it wasn't just the Jews. It was anyone basically which was against a Hitlerist regime.
Yeah, keep in mind, war is a terrible thing. I think we should denounce war, full stop.
Yeah.
War is terrible. We are against war. Again, what happened in the Second World War is that there was not a good and a bad. Of course, Hitler was extremely bad. But at the end of the day, they were all butchers. War could have been avoided. Second World War is actually not Second World War. It's a single war. It's World War I, World War II are a single war. It's just there was a in between some calm, they stopped the war, but it's a single war. This is how we should look at history.
And I mean, in both, it's more or less big businesses profit from this.
Yeah, the war started. The First World War started because Germany was an emerging power against England. And that's the reason, this is, the British Empire didn't want, the powerhouse of Germany to raise. And already then it was about oil, there was a Baghdad ban. Baghdad ban was a railway that was going from Baghdad to Germany. It was supposed to help the German economy to get access to oil. So you see this whole thing, when I just going back, in the Second World War, I think they were all butchers, The only thing is that there's only a more skillful butcher that won, the US won, but, again, there's lots of things, crimes against humanity that they did. I mean, they dropped 2 bombs, nuclear bombs on Japan, while war was over. So you see, they were all butchers, and the difference is that whoever wins gets to write history. So I think it's we need to be cautious about history, and also this is a sensitive topic, but remember there are laws in Europe and around the world that actually forbid us to talk about history. It's illegal, including in Switzerland. So I will not go into the topics too much, But so I was saying, you see this topic about being anti-Zionist, they try to portray you to be anti-Semite. And this is what happened with the Corbyn in the UK. You see, there was a huge campaign against Corbyn, who's a socialist and who's against apartheid in Israel.
Yeah.
And is against the genocide, because it's a cultural genocide that is happening in Palestine. So I think they are, this whole sense of guilt, Holocaust, and so on is being used too much in the Palestinian and Israeli conflict.
Definitely, yeah.
So you see, there was a how the Zionist project started. In 1917, there was the Balfour Declaration, where the British Empire, the British, they signed a letter to actually, the letter was from Lord Balfour to Mr. Rothschild, again, this name, a very powerful man. And he was saying that the British Empire was promising a land that didn't belong to the British Empire in order to create a Jewish state. So that's how it started, and it is the Balfour Declaration is related to the support of the Wall Street bankers, that the pressure that the Wall Street bankers back then gave to the USA to go into war in the First World War. It's related to that, but it's a long story. I won't go too much into details. So this project basically was to get some lands there, but again, at the expense of people who were already living there, and keeping in mind that Jews and Arabs, Palestinians, they were living in peace for 2,000 years. So in one generation, they managed to put import war, and import people that actually did not belong to there. you know. Jews and Palestinians were living happily and in peace for generations, you know. They were brothers, and actually they didn't care about religion, you know. They were going by their day.
Yeah.
They saw this Zionist project is quite evil, sadly. You know, I have nothing, you know, I love Israel. I love, you know, it's an amazing place. I love Judaism. You know, Judaism, I've been you know, I attend the Shabbat, and I think it's just magic, you know, the whole energy and so on. So I have nothing against this. But
could you explain what Zionism is for the audience?
So Zionism is a project of creation of a state of Israel. And the Zionist movement started, well, it started before 1917, but actually the first conferences, actually the first conference was in Switzerland. I don't have the name of the person who was behind it. Oh, there's a, you know, he's famous, but you know, he's supposed to be the you know, there's a few figures, you know. I don't have the name right now, but later on.
You mean a famous industrialist, or?
No, you know, the origin of Zionism, you know, who the doctrine, that doctrine, where it started from. So maybe it'll come back to me. But it was taken over later by people, you know, famous people like Ben Gurion and so on, which were not actually practicing religion. So imagine back in the old days, in reality, there was a transition time where the British were supposed to control, you know, the land of Palestine or the future Israel. And back in the old days, there was a Haganah. Haganah was the army, the Jewish army. They were doing like lots of terrorism against the British back then. You know how interesting is that? And
you mean against their intervention?
No, it was because the British, they were in control, you know, of Jerusalem and Palestine. So they had a mandate from the UN just to facilitate the transition.
Yeah.
So the UN vote for the creation of Israel, the first time it failed, the second time it went through. It went through because of the huge pressure that the US gave in the UN. And so it was by a very small margin. So that's how it started. And but the problem is that at the beginning it was a very small portion of land, and then I think while some of the mistakes that the Arab world did was that they bet on them being much more powerful back in the old days. You know, they thought that they could join into a war, and they did that a few times. You know, a few times the not only Palestinians but also, you know, the Arab world, they went against the Jewish state, and they always lost. They lost because the Israelis were much better prepared, and they were backed by the US, you know, like with powerful arm and very professional army.
The way I understood it was even the Soviet Union which supported it, and that's what I kind of find interesting, because the Soviet Union had like their own autonomous oblast which they made for the Jews within the Soviet Union to give them like a home, because their doctrine was that every I'm not sure if it's every ethnicity, but more or less every group of people, for instance, the French should have their French nation, the Germans should have their German nation, the Jews should have their Jewish nation, not as forced, but in order to preserve their culture, their history, their language, all of that. And that's the way I understand it, why they made this Jewish oblast in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but think about it, you know, I think it's completely wrong. If you think you have Arabs, you have Muslims, and you have Jews, and they're living together in one land, and then there is apartheid. and there is a lot of discrimination towards Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a racist project. You know, it's the same as apartheid in South Africa.
Oh no, I'm not saying it's good. What is happening in Palestine, of course.
You know, interesting enough, it's actually back in the old days, one of the very few countries that were still trading with the South Africa apartheid was Israel. You know, so I think it's unfortunately it's a racist project, really, and it's going against human rights. You know, it's a huge violation. But the problem again is that because of a powerful minority of Jews in the US, you know, AIPAC is very strong in the US.
What is AIPAC?
AIPAC is a association. It's the lobby, the Jewish lobby in the US, and so it's very funny. It's almost like you have to pledge allegiance to AIPAC. It's as important as pledging allegiance to your own country. So the Israel is in reality an extension of the US empire. And in reality, if you look at the Middle East, it's being planted there to fight US war in some ways, you know, in the Middle East. You know, platform intelligence for intelligence, you know, and if you look at now who's actually bombing quite often Syria and actually attacking, doing some terrorist acts in Iran, you know, Soleimani was killed by the Mossad, you know, so they are extremely powerful. And keep in mind, you know, it's a small nation, but they're getting like around $4 billion a year from the US. And that's because of the huge support of the Jewish lobby. You know, the congressmen, senators, they have no choice but to be Zionist. You know, it would be impossible to have a successful someone to have too much power in the U.S. and being anti-Zionist. It would be just unthinkable.
And they also killed Iranian nuclear scientist, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They did kill Iranian scientist.
I don't know his name.
You know, it's you know, Soleimani. If you look at Soleimani would be the equivalent of Blinken. You know, even more. He's a war hero. I mean, he's a huge personality. So imagine if Iran was killing Blinken, you know, it's this whole thing about reciprocity.
Do you mean Lincoln or Blinken? Because
Blinken.
Oh, Blinken. I understood Lincoln.
No.
Oh, okay.
So imagine, you know, I think it's about just drawing parallels. You know, what if it happened like this, so on and so on. You know, the project, the Zionist project. It is like, imagine if in Switzerland we had a religion, you know, let's say the Swiss religion, and then you have people in Poland, you know, they choose to have the same religion as ours, right? And then they say, oh, we claim to get our land back. So basically they get, you know, they come to Switzerland and they claim that, you know, we are going to establish a nation here because we have the same religion as you guys. But now we start expelling you and we start putting you in concentration camp. You know, this is what they do. Gaza is a huge concentration camp, which is surrounded by a wall.
Yeah.
You know, and people cannot get out, you know, so it's inhumane. It's inhumane, you know, and it is nothing about being against Jews or Israelis and so on. You know, it's just about humanity. You know, and I just wish either they live in two different states. You give a state to Palestinians, or they live together in you know, two nations in the same state. You know, it's just about seeking peace. It doesn't matter after all. You know, it's just, you know, just labels. You know, and there's nothing to do about being anti-Semite or so on. You know, it's just
it's true.
You know, it's a look. I don't have time for that. You know, I think there are many other fights. Personally, I think my fight is to have it against imperialism. And I think the Zionist project is part of imperialism. So let's say if tomorrow the USA fails, collapses, I think we might see ripple effects of collapses of other imperialist states, you know.
Do we want to explain quick what imperialism is?
Well, it's a project of the white supremacy project of getting their hands on the global south. And it's about oppressing people, just squeezing those nations out of the raw material, out of all the resources they have, you know.
Yeah, and keeping the country poor, that's an important aspect.
Yeah, you know, keep them poor, undereducated, you know, like keep the mortality high, just, you know, just keep them oppressed, you know. There are many different ways. You know, the French, you know how they do the French. Not only they have the army, but they impose French currency, which is, the name is a CFA, the franc CFA. And I think there are 14 countries in Africa that have a currency which is issued by France. Imagine. I mean, this is real imperialism. You know, it doesn't matter. You know, the most power you have is when you control the currency. So it doesn't matter. You can even give them democracy, but if you are controlling their currency, how much sovereignty do those guys have? You know, it's just a joke. It's ridiculous.
So, and I mean, the First and the Second World War were more or less imperialist. To quote Goebbels, he literally said, there's oil, there's gas, and there's coal, which we want to get in the Ukraine, and this is what we're fighting for. So it's clear. The Second World War was mostly about places were already dominated by other nations, and so the Nazis had to take over these places so they could expand their markets. And so the Krupp family, which financed the war in the first place, and all the weapons production of Nazi Germany, could get a hold of those companies.
Yeah, actually, if you look at what happened, I think it was an amazing chessmate that the US did. You know what they did? I mean, you know, they took over the British Empire. I mean, basically, the position of that the British had was taken over by the US. The US started actually financing. You know, Hitler was financed by the Wall Street bankers at the beginning. You know, it's a big taboo, but I think it's worth talking about this. You know, why? Because back in the old days, the biggest danger for the US was communism. So they started the financing, and once actually Hitler was starting to win, you know, especially when he started the Barbarossa campaign, you know, going to Russia and so on. This is when the US started shipping lots of armaments to Russia, to the USSR, and they were starting financing, I mean, so much to the USSR. And basically it's about financing both sides, destroying both sides. You know, Russia had, I don't know how many, but probably 20 million people died, you know. So at the end, you had Russia.
When exactly?
Sorry? Around 20 million. I don't have the exact...
when exactly?
1945, you know, this is when the war, you know, when they started to finance Russia, USSR. It's just in the middle of the war, you know, basically. So you see... Europe and the USSR ended up being completely destroyed, and then you have the USA completely, absolutely untouched. You know, I mean, how many soldiers died? You know, and the soldiers, the American soldiers that died, they were not even white; they were black, poor Americans that they sent, you know, on the front.
Yeah,
you know, it's just again, you know, this. Some of those when you watch Hollywood movies, so with white guys fighting, but in reality the first lines were black people, poor black people from Harlem, you know. So you see, it was a very smart move. And then you have Europe completely destroyed, Russia as well, and then there's a Marshall Plan where they finance those countries, and in reality, in 1945, around 40 to 45% of world GDP was US GDP.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because when there was war in Russia and Europe, all around the world, who was producing for the war was the USA.
Yeah.
And then they financed reconstruction with the Marshall Plan. But you know, who was producing the goods for the Marshall Plans? By the USA. Mm-hmm. So they got, like, it was just amazing, 40 to 45% of GDP. This mm-hmm. is what they became like a superpower. And in reality, since the Second World War, the whole recycling of a surplus, you know, they started with a surplus, and then they, you know, for many years, until the 70s, then they started to have a deficit. And the deficit,
surplus of what?
A deficit because they were selling more than they were buying. You know, this is,
yeah.
and now
more export than import.
And now we are at an extreme where you know, there's a huge deficit, and the deficit is just being compensated by printing money, mm-hmm. because there's no country right now which is buying new issued US bonds. So just, you know, we're just going a bit you know, like spread a little bit, but it's very important to understand this whole context, and I think the Zionist movement can they can do what they are doing now in Palestine. It's related to the Holocaust and the feeling of guilt, you know. Mm-hmm. You see, in the last 20 years, they are like, if you look at the proportion of movies related to the Holocaust, you know, it's just enormous. It's just really tiring, you know. It's just like Spielberg and all those guys. It's just really tiring. It's all, you know, in reality, okay, well, Holocaust was terrible thing what happened, mm-hmm. but it's part of the World War II. You know, there's many other things that happen. You know,
yeah.
You know, there's a 20 million Chinese died, 20 million,
which is hardly talked about.
Died. You know, there's so much more. But mm-hmm. and in reality, it's funny how you see those movies. They see it's always like the liberator is the American, which is who liberated Europe is Russia.
Yeah.
No, the US came into the war into Europe when the war was over.
Basically, more or less.
And it's interesting because Hollywood, you know, they did an analysis of Hollywood, the perception of the war. And it's very sad because people don't read books, they watch Hollywood movies. So in 1945, probably 80%, 90% of Europe, they knew that the liberators were the Russians, the USSR, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you do a survey, well, you will find out that probably it's the opposite. 80% of people think that the America won the war.
Yeah,
and it's an insult. It's an insult to intelligence. It's an insult to history. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that again, you know, history very often is not written by historians. You know. It's written by politicians. You know, it's this whole thing, the agenda. They have an agenda, and very often this is why we need to revise history. This is the job of historians, but not the job of politicians. You know, so this is why it's very important just to look at facts, and just I think we shouldn't suppress the freedom of speech. You know, just to give opinions.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, not only to look at the facts, but to learn from the patterns which we've seen in history and learn from that. And so I come now to a point. First of all, I'm going to ask, what can we do here in Switzerland, or more, we'll talk about that. And then we try to keep up from that history which we've talked about to what's happening now. So you've mentioned imperialism, and of course, we want to do something against imperialism, and we have to ask ourselves, we're here in Switzerland, what can and what should we do? And as the party, we've decided to stay neutral on the grounds that we don't interfere, that Switzerland shouldn't interfere either with blockade or sanctions or anything else, but instead trade with all the countries around, you know, like Syria, Iran, Iraq, Libya, all these countries around this conflict area, and additionally to recognize Palestine as a nation, because Israel has been recognized by Switzerland as a nation, so why shouldn't we do that with Palestine? And it's clear to our party that this is a war of self-determination, more or less. This is an anti-Zionist war, and it's not too different, I would say, like the Irish Revolution.
Yes, I think again, you know, this project, you know, this especially now the U.S. Imperialism. If you look at history, it's a very, we call this an anomaly of history. I think we shouldn't fight it like from the front. I think it will self-destruct itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is why in reality, when you look at what China and Russia are doing, they're just waiting, you know. Time is on the side of Russia and China. Why? Because they're not engaging into war. Mm-hmm. They're not spending, you know, it's almost $1 trillion that the US is spending per year in armament, in war. And this is $1 trillion that is going to printing. It's making Americans poorer, and they're spreading too much. You know, it's a small nation. It's 300 million people. You know, and you cannot have such a small nation which is, you know, which has its hands on all the world. You know, on the global south and so on. You cannot have hundreds of bases, 800 bases around the world. How can you manage that?
I mean, it's insane.
So I think it's a project that will collapse by itself. Mm-hmm. And because it will collapse, they are going to have a ripple effect into all the smaller empires. You know, when I say smaller empires, you know, they in some ways, you know, like France is still a small empire too. You know, the British, they still have some colonies. You know, they have some islands here and there. You know, so a lot of those projects will fall apart, and we will enter into a new multipolar world which will be gradually, you know, decolonized. So the global south, you know, Africa, South America, they will be like, finally there will be sovereign states, you know, and this whole project of new world order, which is ruled by the elite, the Wall Street elites, will completely fail, you know.
Can you explain the theory of the New World Order?
Well, you know, it's trying just to get a stronger hold onto the world, you know. I mean, it's right now the only oppositions are those countries. Some countries got destroyed, you know. Countries like Syria, Libya, Iraq, they got destroyed because they opposed this imperial project. But now, who's leading this movement? And it's not an active movement. It's basically it's about fighting the currency, just not using the dollar. It's what we call the de-dollarization. So once you start doing that, it's being much more passive, and it's going to accelerate the dollar hegemony, and by definition also imperialist, because it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable because it was just around the dollar. It was imposed at the Second World War. You know, the USA imposed on the world to use dollar. They had no choice. But back in the old days, they had a trade surplus. Now they have a huge trade deficit. So how do you compensate for your trade deficit? You print dollars. Printing dollar, if you are a global currency, there's no impact on inflation, because you can keep on printing. You get assets all around the world, and it's okay. But once it's you are a closed country, people stop using your dollars, then it's like the Weimar Republic, hyperinflation. And we start seeing that already now. the inflation is extremely high, and I think it's underestimated. And now also with the cryptocurrency and having like countries like China using alternative currencies, well, this is the start of the collapse of the US empire. It's over. It's a game over. It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So I think this is why, I mean, when we are talking in terms of us being Swiss, we don't have to fight that. I think we should always stick into Swiss neutrality, protecting Swiss sovereignty. That is the most important. It's about just caring for Swiss people. And this should be like this for everyone. In Russia should be the same. And then it's about how we can promote peace. So Switzerland, I think it's still a very interesting position in being a mediator, a referee into some conflict. So when probably Switzerland, when this will be over with the US, there's going to be either a collapse or maybe a bailout of US economy. We might have a new world order, but in a good sense.
But Angelo, I have to disagree with you. I would say we're already living in the New World Order, because for me the New World Order was neoliberalism, which was tried in the South Americas. You know, George H.W. Bush talking about we'll have a New World Order. That was the destruction of Iraq. That was the destruction of Libya. That was the destruction of Syria.
No. You didn't get me, Jason. What I meant by New World Order is it's in a good sense. Now there's a New World Order, but after this New World Order, there will be another order, and that other order will be a multipolar world. It will be a more democratic world. If you look at the nations, you know, now you have at the UN, you have like 5 big nations, and you have your veto, and in reality,
you mean the veto power of the US?
Veto power, I don't think it's a bad thing, but what is bad is that its half force is being utilized. You know, it's you see, whenever we talk about Israel, there are lots of things that were passed by the like sanctions. They were passed against Israel, and every time there's 2 countries that veto, it's Israel and the US, and because there's a hegemonic and very aggressive stance from the US, it's all about sanctions, and this is the lightest, or it's about like physical attacks, and this is not democracy. Democracy, if you look at the broader sense in terms of United Nations, it's really about one country, one vote, and when you look at motions, very often, if you were to, there are many more countries voting for China than supporting the US, and even the US what we call allies are not, in fact, not allies. They are hostages. Yeah. Keep in mind that
you say that often.
Many allies, like Japan, allies like Japan, Italy, Germany, they, not Korea, South Korea. Well, you have US Army bases there. Their NSA is doing, has a very strong foothold in those countries. Well, you are not an ally, you are a hostage. It's, it's a reality, so there's I don't think there's really allies. There might be a few allies, but they are probably the WASP, it's like the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, more like a Commonwealth, Australia, the hardcore, Australia, England, and the USA. This is the real hardcore, but they share the same roots, but then Japanese, I really think that Japanese are just hostages. They have no choice. There's If you look at Japan in the 1980 or something like this, there was a Plaza Accord. The Plaza Accord was because Japan was about to overtake the USA. Well, they sat down, the G5, I think it was a G5 back then. They sat down with Japan and they said, well, you know, you are going to, your currency is too low. You are going to make your currency higher. And basically, well, this single fact that the currency went up, they had like at least a 1 decade completely lost. And it gives you an example of meddling, you know, and this is actually, this Plaza Accord is not it's very similar to what the US tried to do with China. They could do the same, you know, that and China wouldn't take it, you know. They want to talk as equal, and you know, so and it's a sovereign state, you know, they will never accept what the Japanese did. But again, did Japanese have a choice? If I was a Japanese politician, maybe I would do the same. You have no choice, you know, until one day that the system collapses, and a lot of countries will regain their sovereignty, including South Korea. Yeah. I'm sure South Korea, you know, they wish there would be less interference of the US, and I think they would have a much better relationship with China. All those countries, you know.
We should try to go now into the direction of today. What I wanted to add is what Switzerland should do is they should try to also trade, of course, with the Palestinians after recognizing it as a nation, and being kind of a country which says, look, you can come to us and you can discuss matters, and we are like a neutral party where we can make sure that both parties are heard and both parties feel respected. And
yes, but when it comes to Israel, again, there's a rule of law, you know, there's international law. I think Switzerland should stand for respect of international laws.
Yeah, they should generally, in the UN, they should be stopping wars, they should be stopping intervention, they should try to prevent any type of war.
Yeah.
And I don't really see that at the moment. Do you?
No, I don't see that. And actually, unfortunately, we have the stance of the political stance on when it comes to international politics. Switzerland has been taking stances which are Atlantist stances, pro-NATO.
Yeah.
If you look at maybe not when it comes to Russia, but when it comes to China, they've been siding with the Hong Kong protesters, and they've been siding in a letter against China when it was related to the Uyghur.
And I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it, when a country, the United States, which killed in the 70s so many people, destroyed so many countries, and now doesn't really care what's going on in Palestine, or in Syria, or in what was going on in Libya or in Iraq, they suddenly somehow now care about what's going on in China with a minority Muslim group. It's kind of strange to me, at least.
Yeah, well, you see, I think it's about talking about facts. You know, there was a mission of there was a letter written. There were two letters. One was a letter written against China on the Uyghur issue. One was a letter written in favor of China. And if you look at the list of countries, of course, the letter written in favor of China is a much bigger. And when you look at the background, actually, most of the Muslim countries, if not all of them, they signed the letter in favor of China, because they know about radicalism, you know, they looked at facts. Now, when you look at the letter which was written against China on the Uyghur issue, well, it's very simple. They were all like NATO countries, except, of course, Turkey. Turkey didn't sign it.
Oh.
And was in Switzerland joined in, you know, was just crazy thing. But and then I think who else signed in? I think Japan did. I'm not sure that if India did or not. But you know, it's very clear. There's nothing you see. It's a whatever, just siding against China. You know, when you look at, I mean, all the Muslim countries, they voted for China, and they said this is a great model. They, you know, there are lots of missions went to China just to learn about this de-radicalization system, how it works. You know? Again, I'm not saying that China is doing right.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not, you know, we need to be critical. You know, problematic is different in every single country. China is 1.4 billion people. It's more than 50 nationalities, many languages, writing. It's you know, it's 4,000 years of history. It's extremely complex, extremely complex. They had civil wars and so on. Now it's the golden time of China, you know, 40 years of prosperity. It's they had 750 million people being lifted out of poverty. It's just amazing. But there are things that apply to China. You know, there are, you know, it's an ongoing process. But when you look at what they have achieved, you know, it's just amazing. Of course, every single country has problems. I mean, even Switzerland, you know.
Sure.
But they're dealing well, you know. There was corruption, there was huge corruption 20 years ago, you know. Now it's getting better. You know, it's an ongoing process, you know. And when it comes to human rights, keep in mind that, you know, the standard of human rights is different in China than it is in Europe.
Yeah.
China is more about access to education, food, inequalities, and so on. And it's more about looking in terms of society, not individual. Here, we are more into like looking at individual, you know, it's identity politics, you know, all this BS, you know, about just the individual.
Yeah.
When you are 1.4 billion, you need to look in terms of society, you know, as a whole. You cannot look at each individual and so on. And actually, it's Chinese are having a system that works for Chinese. The same as Russia, they're having a system that works with Russia. Democracy and legitimacy is important. This word of legitimacy, it comes from the approval of people. You know, there's a huge majority of people that approve of Putin. You know, why?
Yeah.
Because he cares about Russia. You know, he doesn't care about the rest of the world, but he cares about Russia, and he's trying as much as possible to deliver. In China, there was the Howard Institute did a survey. You know, Howard Institute doesn't have a reputation to be too much pro-China, but they did a survey, and they found that 95% of people in China support the CPC, the Communist Party, and that is legitimacy. While in the West, and I like to use the US example, well, there's only 30% of people that support support the work of the Congress, you know.
Yeah.
So
but I'd like to say about China, and then after about Putin, I think we don't have time to speak about China that much, but I mean, it's about Tibet, it's about Hong Kong, it's about Taiwan, and it's about Xinjiang, and they want to split up China. We can, I mean, it's very obvious. They want to remove Hong Kong. They want to remove Taiwan. They want to remove Tibet, and they want to remove Xinjiang. And then they will probably drive down the living standards there. And then the next step would be to make the country dependent on the West. And with Putin, it's important to say that in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, just like what I just said now with China, Russia was completely dependent on the West. It was being looted by the West completely of its all natural resources, and sometime Putin then came in and had academic work he written before he left academia, and it said that oil and gas putting that in the center of the economy could make Russia again a superpower, and that's what they did, and that's why people love Putin, because he took them out of the 90s crisis.
Yeah, just a small parenthesis on China. There's again, since the 1950s, the Dalai Lama has been funded by the CIA. There's ample proofs of that. So he was a CIA agent. So he was a useful idiot of the West. Just because they wanted to initiate a separatist movement in Tibet.
And he was even a member of the Communist Party at one point.
Oh, yeah, actually, but there's we could talk about this much longer, but I think at some point, it seemed like he was influenced by his family and his brother to leave for India and start a separatist movement. But at the beginning, he was actually in good terms. He was in good term, with Beijing. So you see, Dalai Lama was financed by the CIA. Then you have the Xinjiang movement, the World Uyghur Congress. The founder, Erkin Altekin, he was actually a CIA agent. He was working with Radio Free Asia, and he was contributing to the fall of the USSR. Back in the old days, he was actually working on the radio and just pushing for having the Turkic-speaking nations of the USSR to split up from Russia. So this guy, can you imagine, the World Uyghur Congress, the founder, was a CIA agent. You can even check on it's even on Wikipedia.
Wikipedia is not always a source.
No. But of course, there are ample interviews. He was actually.
Does he admit it?
No, I've seen some interviews. He says himself that he was working for Radio Free Asia and he was working for regime change.
Yeah.
And you know what he's saying in his interview? He's saying that a lot of oil and gas companies from the US, they approached him, and what he said is that, well, if you guys help me, well, I will give you access to oil and gas from Xinjiang. He said clearly. So you see, you have plenty of evidence.
Yeah.
Again, it's just, but the problem is that there's so much propaganda. We are fighting against a huge machine. The CIA has been financing lots of outlets, and there's an entity called USAGM, which is financed by at the height of $1 billion per year, and it's all about propaganda. There's Biden just signed a bill of $300 million per year, which will be a focus on demonizing the Belt and Road Initiative. So imagine when you have $300 million per year to fight against China on media.
To fight against an infrastructure project which pulls out poor countries out of poverty instead of giving that to your people. It's interesting, yeah. But we know that the US and even the USRF is lying about Palestine and what's going on there. For instance, in the Gaza Strip. And I think because this video is about Palestine and Israel, we should try to talk now about why is it suddenly again in the news? Why is everyone suddenly talking about it? So we looked at the history, and now we have to go from that point. I think we were at the Second World War, and the funding of Israel and not local Jews, but Jews from the other country supported the founding of that new nation, if you can even, if you can even call it a nation, and
No, again, I'm not against the country Israel. I think Israel could live. I don't even think that Iran wants the destruction of Israel. A lot of time it was, if they said so, it was taken out of the context. I think what they want is that they want some basic right of Palestinians. You cannot put them in camps. There are millions of Palestinians that are refugees in Lebanon, in Jordania, around the world, I mean, where are their human rights there, you know? And how can you putting wall again around Gaza, and people are living in concentration camps in Gaza? I mean, this is a reality. It's just facts, you know. There are walls, you know. There's a big wall just surrounding Gaza, and people
Yeah.
cannot go out, you know.
And
You
if they
just
go too close to the border, they get shot.
you know,
And
yeah,
sometimes they even shoot a lot of medics just for fun.
yeah, you know, the Israeli, they control the water and electricity. So whenever there's a problem, you know, they can just shut down the water. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
that is just disgusting. Again, you know, I think that they need to find a solution. But when you look at the media, who's willing, which journalist is willing to stand up for Palestinians? You know, you are putting your job at stake. You know, your livelihood at stake. Who's controlling the media? You know, you need to look at follow the money. You know, very often journalists, I like to call them prostitutes. You know, prostitutes. You know, like prostitutes.
Oh, yeah.
They're nothing else. You know, they're being
Yeah.
paid. You know, it's not. It lost its glamour. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and now actually the whole propaganda is shifting a little bit. You know, because of the mainstream media, they're losing power. Now you have all those YouTubers,
Mm-hmm.
but they are being co-opted. You know, I give you an example. Democracy Now!
Mm-hmm.
Used to be a very good alternative media, especially during the Iraqi war.
Yeah.
But then it started getting funding from outside, and now is actually following completely the U.S. State Department, you know, propaganda. So when it comes to Syria, they just follow exactly what the U.S. State Department wants them to say.
Yeah.
You know, and that is the problem. The problem is that money can corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So when I mentioned just before USAGM, the way USAGM works is that they have many different entities, but you can actually go there. If you are, let's say you are anti-Chinese or anti-Russian, you can go to USAGM and say, well, can you give me a grant? This is the work I do and so on. And they will give you a grant. If they like you, if you have good exposure, if you are in line with what the propaganda, which is anti-China, well, it's fine, you'll get money. But I mean, if you have a more neutral approach, that there's no way they are going to give you money.
Yeah.
And you see, I mean, money corrupts.
Speaking of the press, there's a kind of a trend I've noticed, which is I've looked into what the US has done in the past. You know, going around, for instance, in East Timor, killing people, and it's always, most of the time, it's well documented. You have video footage, you have image footage. What's going on now in Palestine? Tons of footage. You know, all these videos, even RT reporting on it. But then with China, there's not a lot around. There are a few images. They tell you, look on Google, and that's it.
Yeah. Again, you know, there's a huge censorship. You know, now you have the big tech, which is very anti-democratic. I mean, you saw what happened with Trump. You know, it's something that we don't talk enough about this, but it started with Trump. You know, he was still president. They shut him down from all the social media platforms. And especially nowadays, even though I agree they are private, but nowadays this is the main way that people get information from, right? So you shut him down, and it starts with him. Not that I'm a fan of Donald Trump, but you know, it started with him. But now you have they're expanding this project of censorship, and there are many different ways. One way is to shut down accounts, YouTube accounts, and so on. Another way is to change the algorithm to give people less exposure. And there are many different tricky ways. You know, they take away followers. You know, they unfollow followers. So in my case, you know, in my Twitter account, I went from 0 to 8,000 people following me. It took 1 month, and then for 2 years, it's been staying there, and I don't have much exposure. I have the status of they call shadow banned. So
Yep,
basically,
we know
the,
that. That's also an Instagram thing.
yeah, the tweets the way I reach people is only people that follow me, but they, if they retweet my tweets, there's a very low probability that people will see that, so it gives me a very low exposure. So I don't have any voices, it's very impossible. It's almost impossible for me to speak to the people I'd like to speak to,
Yeah.
For me, it's no use to speak to Chinese media or Iranian media. I do it once in a while, But I wish they would give us a voice to more moderate media, more balanced media. But journalists, this job, it's no more what it used to be. Or I even wonder if it was ever through journalists. It's just. Again, it's follow the money. Journalists are not going to risk their job, their livelihood, just to speak out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, imagine our channel. We talk on here about Myanmar. We talk on here about China. We talk on here about all the wars or all the war crimes which the US has committed. We have videos of the Empire Files. We have videos of Brian Berlectic.
Yes, great.
I can't say his name.
Berlectic.
We have videos of you. We have videos of me. We have. I wouldn't be surprised if our how do you say, our range on YouTube is also very much decreased. And actually, Jimmy Dore has found proof because they confirmed that, because the Google founder or is the Google owner more or less said, yeah, we're just trying to give to corporate news the outreach on YouTube, and it used to be that one of your videos might be on the front page of YouTube when you look for a specific term, while now it's just corporate news. So it's literally, like I said in the other video, it's a covering of one lens of the glasses, where you have the Eastern lens and the Western lens, and they just want you to see through the Western lens.
Yeah, there's so much hypocrisy. Think about it. The West is always claiming, oh, you should have freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Where is my freedom of speech?
Yeah.
Oh, they claim human rights, but when you're killing 1 million people in Iraq, where are their human rights? There's so much hypocrisy. When you are doing an embargo on Venezuela and tens of thousands of kids die because of the embargo, where are their human rights? When you have you want to promote democracy, but you promote democracy only if the result of the vote is going to the direction you want. They wanted democracy in Palestine, and the Hamas won, and then they didn't recognize the Hamas. How much hypocrisy there is there.
Can you tell me what exactly the Hamas stands for? I just know, I think it's in their program that they support a two-state solution. But
well, the thing is that when you are attacked and demonized, I'm not sure if they are still in the terrorist list, but they're not into a position where they can even discuss with Israel. Hamas is slightly more, I would say, traditional, conservative, more like stronger. There's a stronger value in terms of religion. And of course, they used to, the Palestinians were at war since, they're still, but at some point, of course, there was some terrorism. In the old days, they, like people, because of desperation, they would blow themselves up.
Yeah.
And I'm against terrorism. Really, we should denounce terrorism. But those were acts of desperation. So I'm not in their head. I think it's we need to fight terrorism, but at the same time, we need to fight the root of terrorism. We cannot oversimplify.
That's usually poverty.
Well, you put people in cages, you humiliate them, you destroy their livelihood. Imagine,
Yeah, which creates
imagine
poverty.
a mother that gets her child killed. You are a mother, you get your child killed, but you know what? You are willing to do anything.
That's the other thing.
You have lost everything. You've lost the most important thing that you have in your life. You've lost your dignity. Well, then there's only a small step into blowing yourself up because you've lost everything.
Yeah.
And it's a tragedy. Terrorism and the root of terrorism are both a tragedy.
But I think to counter that is to make sure that these people there have infrastructure, that these people have access to education and all of these things. Because, for instance, the way I understood it, China in Xinjiang built up infrastructure. They took people out of poverty, and by doing so, people are less attracted to terrorism, because normally, even how revolutions and such work is, when people are so desperate, they are ready for any radical solution. And if someone is promising you 70 young women in heaven, which if you die for it, you'll get, it's easier to fall into a trap like that, especially if you are either religious or don't have a lot of education.
Yes, I think education is a very important element. Again, it's about, but when it comes to Xinjiang, it's very simple to debunk all those lies. They talk about the genocide. The Xinjiang Uyghur minority over the last 20 years, they increased much, much more than the Han Chinese in the Xinjiang province. Poverty eradication. Now we are, when we are talking about extreme poverty, we are down to 0 in China. It's just amazing. It's in terms of humanity history, is the biggest achievement ever. Getting 750 million people out of poverty. So they brought education, health, life expectancy increasing, protection. When they talk about protecting religion, there are over 20,000 mosques in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
With that, 20,000 mosques. Even Switzerland, how can you give lessons to Xinjiang? We put in the constitution in Switzerland to make it illegal to build minarets for mosques. Yeah. Minarets, and you are going to Xinjiang and point the finger at China not respecting Muslims when they have 20,000 mosques. Those are facts, it's about going there and looking for facts, not about a rumor of one guy, which is, Adrian Zenz, which is paid by the US State Department. Of course, it's about follow the money and follow the motives. The money comes from the US State Department. Motives, well, China is becoming the largest superpower. It's taking over the US. And you want to contain China. That's as simple as that, And is it the first time that the US is lying? No, they've done it over and over. Remember Iraq? Iraq, they say that Iraqi military, they were...
Weapons of mass destruction.
Well, weapon of mass destructions, they were killing babies,
throwing them out of incubators, I think.
Syria, the gas and so on, just it's not the first time, and like this, they started many wars, Vietnam War started on a lie too, so the problem is that I'm just shocked at how people can fall for the same lies over and over. I
completely agree with you, and that is why I think we should stick to Swiss neutrality, because we can never 100% say is something, for instance, in I don't know a good example at the moment. Just say X country, is something really happening there? Unless we go there and see it for ourselves,
Yeah.
Like, that's why I don't think it makes sense to interfere in the relations of other countries, even in the Israel-Palestine conflict, which you might agree with, but I think for Switzerland it would be the best thing to say, again, we are the neutral negotiator, we can help you, we will recognize Palestine because Israel has been recognized, and we'll fight against wars in... we'll fight against fighting in the UN.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I think we need to keep a neutral stance. Again, you know, when it comes to fighting imperialism, I really think that it will collapse by itself.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, we will enter into a new era, more democratic, and I think you know, again, you know, there are going to be major changes. You know, there's going to be a shift towards Eurasia. Because of the Belt and Road Initiative, but also keep in mind that there's going to be a huge infrastructure project in the whole global south.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's amazing. You finally, all those nations, you know, that are going to regain their sovereignty and have access to basic human rights.
Yeah.
They were denied for a long time, you know, self-determination and so on. So I think this is why I think that somehow we don't necessarily need to fight imperialism. We need to denounce injustice, of
Mm-hmm.
course. But I think it will, imperialism will destroy itself by itself. You know, this is why time is in favor of a multipolar world. It's just time. We just have to hope that they are not going to provoke a war. You know, it's what we call false flag. You know, they say, oh, they started the war. You know, they do something bad. You know, they I don't know, maybe they put a bomb somewhere and they say, well, this is the Chinese that did it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start a war, and this is what my biggest fear is, that, you know. But otherwise, you know, if time is in favor of the multipolar world, because
but what do you think? Because I've looked at the map the other day, and I think it's either it's 24% or 0.24%, which is left of Palestine. What do you think happens when it drops to 0%? Is the media gonna be, if that happens, is it gonna be like, huh? What's Palestine? And never heard of that? Or what do you think are they gonna do? Because it becomes obvious once it's at 0% that indeed land has been taken from them.
Well, I think, well, besides this problem, long term, Israel will have a huge problem, which is demography. When you look at, you know, there's a Israeli Arab population and there's a Jewish Israeli population.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Arabs have having more babies, and with time, it's just a matter of time where the Arabs will be more than the Jews in Israel. And because of this discrimination, if you are really applied democracy, how are you going to deal with that, you know? And I think this is one of the reasons that Israel still doesn't have a constitution, you know, constitution just to make the rule clear. It's still an early project, and they need to get their house in order, you know, because it's not sustainable, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's you know, you sweep the floor, you know, you can sweep the floor as much as you want, but you know, it's down underneath, it's dirty. It's dirty. They need to deal with their contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
It's full of contradiction. It's full of lies. Really, it's a project that is inhumane, you know, and sadly, you know, it could work. It could work, but again, you know, there are people, there's a history, and there's possibility for people to live together, hand by hand, in peace.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that when you are talking about, you see, I have a dialogue of peace. What I want, even when it comes to China or the US, what I'm looking for is just peace. I just don't want war. I think war, you know, is something that we need to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need more humanity, equality, and so on. So that's my project. So I think it's very unfair, it's very counterintuitive, whoever is actually saying, well, I promote democracy, human rights, and so on, they are actually the ones that are very hypocritical, and they are going against basic human rights, because they are imperialists. Since when imperialism is for human rights and democracy? It's not. It's for people. It's it's having like 3/4 of the world being oppressed, and just it's about exploiting people, and I think it's disgusting. Human exploiting human is disgusting. And this is also why I'm leaning more left, But again, I think it's important, when we say left, I'm left when it comes to economic, the class struggle. But
I mean, that is a type of left which we don't have anymore in Switzerland, and that is why we call our party more or less traditional left.
Yes.
Because this type of left which is around now is more liberal, more or less. It's actually liberal, it's not really left.
Yeah,
but we've already hit the 1 hour mark.
Oh, 1 hour, yep.
What could we else say about Palestine? I think it's important to talk about the Gaza Strip and how when people go demonstrating, for instance, against the occupation, they just most of the time shoot at protesters. They use poisonous gas. They've even used illegal bullets. They're called exploding bullets, and when they hit you, they explode and more or less shatter. And what else do they use? They use many things which are illegal. Maybe you can add on to that.
Well, you can detain people. There's torture there. It's extremely inhumane. I think it's also because they educate. It starts from education. It's about looking down on Arabs, and it's about valuing the life of an Arab to be less than the life of a Jew. It's as sad as this. It's very sad. It's just. What can you say about this? It's
Can you talk about Al-Aqsa?
Al-Aqsa, the mosque.
I think so, yeah, because I've heard about it, but
well, from what we saw on TV, and I think again, there's a depending on which media you see, it's mainly underreported. But during the Ramadan, how can you? It's an insult to the whole, not only the Muslims in Palestine, but the Muslims around the world. Jerusalem, again, it's the center of many religions. Monotheist religions. It should be protected. It's an international city that should be protected.
Oh, it's a city. I thought it was just a mosque or something.
No, Al-Aqsa is a mosque, but what they did, they entered into the mosque, and basically, there were tear gas. They were picking up people into the mosque. And I think this is a big insult. And we can do some speculation. I mean, why would you do that? Are they hoping to steer more problems in the Middle East, because the repercussion of whatever is happening in Jerusalem, there's a repercussion in the whole Middle East, in the whole Arab world, Muslim world. They're getting very angry. I mean, imagine now, if you are Christian, imagine you are Christian, and they are doing the same as they did in the Vatican. They're doing this. They're doing the same. They're beating up people and so on in the Vatican. I mean, the Vatican it's a symbol for Christians, for Catholics. I mean, how shocking would it be for all the Christians around the world? How shocking would it be? Well, what happened in Al-Aqsa is the equivalent. So I mean, again, I'm not a religious person, But I'm for respecting. We need to respect every single religion, Jewish, Muslims, and so on. So where, how hypocrite it is, the US, which is like claiming, bombing, killing 1 million Muslims in Iraq, and turning a blind eye on what happened in Al-Aqsa, putting tear gas into a mosque and beating up people, and then they pretend they care about Uyghur and Xinjiang. It's just ridiculous.
Or Myanmar. They care about Myanmar.
Rohingya, exactly.
Or I think even Thailand. You spoke with Brian Böll even about Thailand.
Yeah, but it's more complex there. It's a huge issue. But it's what is happening in all Southeast Asia is related to the encirclement of China. Encirclement of China started with the Pentagon paper, and then there was a
Panama paper.
Pentagon paper.
Pentagon paper. Okay.
Yeah. And then there was the policy of Obama called Pivot to Asia, and the Pivot to Asia was a policy to shift the focus from the Middle East, just a focus on China and encircling China. So how do you do that? You try to you promote separatist movement in Xinjiang, in Tibet, and you try to destabilize countries that are actually partnering with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. So Myanmar is a close, for a long time, for thousands of years, they've been doing trading with China. So 30-40% of the trade of Myanmar is with China.
Yeah.
So they have lots of Belt and Road initiatives, and they want to disrupt that, So it's a big issue. So it's related to that. So if they cannot have a puppet government or that they want, well, they might as well just destroy the country. That's what they do. Thailand is the same. You want to, again, the monarchy is a uniting entity in Thailand. So when you are trying to destabilize the monarchy, you are destabilizing the unifying entity of Thailand.
Yeah.
So you disrupt that. You're disrupting all the neighbors of China, and that's related to the Belt and Road Initiative, because the Belt and Road Initiative goes through them. Myanmar, there's a oil pipeline which is going from Kunming to the sea, and it's a good way to bypass the Malacca Strait.
The what Strait?
Malacca Strait. There's also Thailand. They had project of cutting up Thailand, to do a canal called the Kra Canal.
Yeah.
And this way it was a good way just to bypass the Malacca Strait, and just to make it more green, because they would save the 1,600 miles of journey, and also to avoid the Malacca Strait, which is probably one of the most sensitive places if one day the US wants to do a blockade of China trade. So you see, there's this, it's all been planned. That's one of the good thing about the US. Sometimes they are very open about this. They said what they were going to do, and they are doing that.
Yeah, bomb the oil, take the oil, like Trump said, for instance.
It's exactly.
But even speaking about oil, we can also see this in Russia, how the US suddenly cares about this. He's not actually the biggest opposition, which is another thing. Our media never talks about the biggest opposition in Russia, but they do talk about Navalny, and the US cares very, very much about Navalny, but they don't care about Julian Assange, which exposed all of the war crimes of the United States, or Edward Snowden.
Yeah. Again, this whole thing about Russia, you see now there's the Nordstream 2. That is quite funny, just this whole thing. How Germany is being taken in hostage, and actually the one that are opposing this are the Green in Germany.
That is why we painted them as a dog with a leash and a collar, is the United States flag on it.
Yeah, well, you see, I mean, the gas, actually, the gas from Russia is much more ecological than
Ah,
in, if yeah, it's
it
more
is.
ecological. Yeah,
Is it
if you
just because
do,
it's closer, or is
so it's closer, it's more ecological too. You know, in
yeah?
the transition, it's better for Germany. You know, the green transition is better to have gas from China, from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
If they buy gas from the USA, it's going to be liquefied gas, which is less green and it's more expensive. You know, and it's less green, much less green.
Yeah.
So you lose sovereignty, and actually, there's so much contradiction. You are green, you should be. I mean, what are you doing? You know, and it's very interesting. There's one thing, you know, as leftists, you know, I mean, traditional left, we need to be extremely, extremely careful. You know, the US and the CIA, they're financing. I mean, not necessarily directly the CIA. You know, they go
Mm-hmm.
in through
Think
NGO,
tanks.
intermediaries, but they're financing new liberal movements, you know, which are, you know, it's promoting, you know, sometimes it's even like labor unions. Can you imagine?
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, it's a penetration, labor unions, LGTB, you know, everything which is related to identity politics,
Mm-hmm.
BLM, bullshit, and so on. You know, all those things which is not related to the class struggle. You know, the class struggle is the traditional left, the real left. You know, not what we call
It's
the
focusing on
left.
economics and economic
Yeah.
problems, and less on
So
you are white. We had too many. I don't even know if you're white or brown, but we had too many light-colored people on this show. Now we need a dark-skinned person to talk
oh my
because
God! You know, it's just, and actually, it comes from a neoconservative agenda. You see what I mean? It's a very conservative agenda, but they're using just to divide the left. You know, so this is why the first enemies we have now, actually, it's those ones. You know, so this is why you have the Green in Germany. They are financed by you know, like some Stiftung, you know, foundations which are, you know, linked to the US State Department.
could
So
you send me the sources to that, because I would like to put that after in
yes,
the description.
the Stiftung is the I think it's Böll or so on, but I'll give you later. And actually, it's the
Thanks.
same. Some those foundations are actually disrupting also Southeast Asia, you know, Thailand. So it's interesting. So you see, the Green are actually supporting warmonger, you know,
Yeah.
and
No, they even here in Switzerland they completely support the foreign policy of the United States. And I wouldn't be surprised if, I don't know, the leaders of the Green Party maybe have connections, maybe have friends in the United States, but I think there's something going on. Or
oh,
they, I don't know, they're just completely brainwashed.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, Greta Thunberg is just you know, another pawn of the system. You know, it's just it's all, but the problem is that the system is getting more and more subtle. That's the problem. So we need just to pay attention about this, you know, and it's not the first time, you know, they've been trying to divide, you know, same as the Trotskyist, you know, the one they wanted to, the revisionist of communists, they wanted to destroy it, you know, so they've been trying to disrupt the left, for the traditional left, for a long time, and I think our biggest enemies are those ones, you know. When it comes, you see how ironic, when it comes to German politics, I would be more for Merkel than from the Green. You know, Merkel, she cares more about Germany, and she is better than the Green. So I'd rather have, and you know, she's not from the left, but I'd rather, you know, I prefer very often real conservative, honest. What I mean by honest is that, you know, they have something, they think,
Values. They have values.
values. So I define myself a leftist when it comes to economics, but I'm from the right when it comes to values.
Yeah.
I don't buy this whole bullshit about identity politics or whatever, you know. Not that I'm against that, you know, but no, it's all BS. Who cares, you know? You know, I mean, you know, if you are gay or you're not gay, who cares? I mean, really, it doesn't
Yeah, to
define
you,
life.
you said it's a hobby
Well, you know,
because it's
sex.
not societally
Well, sex.
required.
Well, sex is two things. It's it's either you use sex for procreation or
Mm-hmm.
it's a hobby, right?
Yeah.
So you know, I mean, if you choose to have men, well, that's your choice. But you know, but is that important? No, it's not. You know, I mean, and again, I think those movements are hijacked. To give you an example, you know, gay marriage very often the ones that are pushing for this agenda are not even gay, actually. You know, if you question, I bet you go in the street and you find 10 gay couples and you ask them, is the marriage, gay marriage, important for you?
Mm-hmm.
What will they say? I mean, really,
I
you know?
actually asked some, not in the streets, but I asked some gay friends, and they actually have told me uh, that it would be nice, but it's not necessary.
Well, we have intermediary, you know, in terms of legally there are intermediary agreements, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think there are some taboos that I will not support that, you know. Transsexual doing sports, you know, I think it's an extremely small minority. Why to go into this, you know? The genders, you know, he or she, we don't have a mother and father. It's no more mother and father. We should say parents. What is this whole bullshit about? You know, it's you know, again, the marriage. I don't know. There are things that I'm still traditional. You know, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think gay couples should have kids. It goes against nature, but not generalize it. The problem is that we are pushing for it. You know, if they do, oh, okay, well, it's okay. But the thing is that when you are pushing for this, it's about having an agenda, and there are some issues why those issues are becoming the most important issues when there are much more important issues, you know, on a daily basis. The main things that people are looking for is basic stuff. It's about putting food on your table. You know, you have a family, you need to put food on the table. You need to fight unemployment,
Mm-hmm.
people homeless, access to education, COVID, you know, this COVID, this, you know, the health system is scrambling. You know, those things are important. I mean, sex, if you like woman or man, that's a hobby. I'm sorry, that's a hobby. You know, call me homophobic, I don't care. I mean, just the problem is that it's not an issue. It's the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the problem is that it's the same as racism. You know, people that focus too much on racism, they might be the one racist in reality,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't see racist problem. I don't, you know. I mean, it doesn't occupy me. I mean, I don't have time. I wouldn't have time for that. You know, there are so many important things in life, really. You know, think about it. You know, I mean, it's a luxury to have time to even be racist. I mean, I don't know. It's just you know, and to make it a topic, a central topic, I think is wrong. I just want to go back to this. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. You know, the Black Panther, they were very, very smart in the old days. You know that the right movements, you know,
The
they
rednecks.
the Boogaloo, they called them the Boogaloo. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they were similar to the Proud Boys, you know, in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And the Black Panthers, you know, they united back in the old days. Do you know why? Because they found they had everything in common. They were white poor people, they were black poor people, and they united. They understood back in the old days that they had a common enemy, which
Mm-hmm.
was Wall Street and the bankers and the elites. And they
Yeah.
were smart. What they did with the BLM movement, and you know, the BLM movement was financed by Foundation, Ford Foundation, and so on. Can you imagine? You know,
I can imagine. I did not know that, but I mean,
yes,
probably to stop racism in quotation marks, of course. But I mean, they knew that they would use this for the vote for the Democrats.
well, whenever the media they elect representative for the BLM movement and so on, you know, because those should be movement without leader,
Mm-hmm.
leaderless movements. You know, when the media elects, you know, they choose people. well, they are co-opted. And in reality, this is when you have movements that are hijacked, you know. At the beginning, it was,
they seem leaderless, but they're not.
Exactly. It becomes, you know, it's just hijacking of movement. And that's the problem, you know. Racism, we should fight it. And I think, you know, there's racism in the US, and I agree, we should fight that. But in reality, they use that for dividing the society. So when you're dividing the white and black, you know, people are focusing on gender issue, race issue, then they don't focus anymore on the issue that matters more, which are social issue, social injustice.
Yeah.
You know, this is how the Wall Street guys, you know, they divert the society. They do diversion.
And I mean, they're very, very happy to have a trans, black, mixed Asian woman pressing the button to bomb some brown people, and or holding up the American and the LGBT flags in front of the US Air Force. They're happy to do that. They can do that as long as you'll shut up then and stop demanding things.
Yeah, you saw the last commercial, the CIA commercial that you started.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
It's so hilarious, you know.
But it was even better when RT copied it and Jimmy Dore made a video on it. It was perfect. Loved it.
Now you have LGTB CIA employee. Well, the bomb is going to be less painful. It's going to be less painful.
It'll be more diverse.
It's just more cool, you know. I reserve, I mean, from now on, we'll get the same amount of bombs, you know, because now it's Biden. But Biden's got, it's diverse, you know, it's cool, you know, he's green, you know, he talks, even though they're working for the same employer, you know, Trump and Biden is the same people that are reeling on the back, you know, they just...
which is the big businesses.
Exactly. The elites, you know, Wall Street and so on.
Not that someone is going to say we're talking about Jews or something. It's the big businesses.
It's big
but
business.
Someone will say that anyway. I mean...
It's okay, but I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. You know, it's a sad world. Well, we need to keep on the fight. At least, you know, if we can be humble and just, you know, whatever, if we can reach out to a few hundred people with this video, you know, it's 100 people that are going to maybe to learn something. If we can share the knowledge, you know, it's important. But you know, I think it's there are people, just amazing people like Jimmy Dore, you know, Gray Zone. There's you know, there are people fighting, you know, and so we're not alone.
Yeah, I mean, we see this throughout the world. We see it with South Africa, with the EFF. We see it in Britain with the Workers' Party Britain, with George Galloway. Yep. We see it in America with Caleb Maupin and Jimmy Dore and his Center for Political Innovation. We see it here in Switzerland with our party. We are pushing it back against this indirect, personalized political landscape where just the individual matters and feelings matter and not facts matter, and it's all about beating around the bush, never saying what you're thinking, but constantly saying, oh, well, we don't necessarily agree or disagree with this, or, you know, where Obama becomes the Nobel Peace Prize, even though he bombed brown people and did a lot of other bad things. I mean, it's ridiculous. And here in Switzerland, the liberals support this.
Sadly, I think you said something which is very right, is people are led by emotions, but not facts. You know, it's people used to read books and learn about history. Now people, they watch Hollywood and that's how they learn history, you know. I've been 3 times in Tibet, and I've read many books, you know, and books by people, Tibetologists, I mean, really expert on Tibet.
Yeah.
And people, you know, I sometimes have arguments with people that they watch a movie, 7 Years in Tibet, Brad Pitt, right? they watch that movie and they want to lecture you about what Tibet is. How ridiculous. I mean, this is how
Yeah.
people do, you know. You know, the Second World War, you know, the foundation of what people know about the Second World War is just Hollywood. It's just Hollywood, really. And of course, I mean, if your references are only Hollywood, I mean, of course, you know,
Yeah.
the guys will
America's
be
the good guy.
always the same.
Yeah.
But the problem is that, you know, you don't give a voice to the other guys, you know. And I think it's a healthier world when you start seeing the world as being gray. You know, I'm not, you know, when I take my stance for Russia or China, I'm not necessarily by nature, you know, like, I mean, crazy about Russia or China. I mean, really not. I think I'm for justice. You know, when I see injustice, and actually the worst is what this injustice can lead to. You know, I've been living in China for 25 years. Well, you know,
I already uploaded that video where you said you had to speak out against Hong Kong protests because they were destroying the country, and you saw what happened in Libya, I think, or is it Syria or Iraq?
I used to live in Venezuela as well, so I've seen some the US meddling there. But the thing is that you see what happened to when I was in Hong Kong is that when you have first-hand experience, they start to destroy your home. Well, then it's different, you know. But when you are, you know, there's they call them bobo in French. In English, they call them the latte liberal. The latte liberal are people that are in Starbucks drinking a $5 expensive latte and actually talking about human rights, you know.
Yeah.
And they have absolutely no clue. They have no first hand. There's so much distance, you know. But when you are living violence and living in a place that could turn into maybe a Syria or Libya. You know, Hong Kong was not very far, you know. It was destruction from morning till evening for 1 year. So much destruction and so much meddling. They were, you know, the media were in the hands of Western powers. The protesters, the writers, they were financed by the US through National Endowment for the Democracy. It was just, Hong Kong was hijacked.
Yeah.
And when you have that, and it's your home, well, believe me, I mean, personally, I had to stand up and speak out, you know. And they call me many names, you know. They call me Nazi and so on, but who cares? Who cares? At least, you know, I can stand up in the morning, I can look at myself in the mirror, and I can say, well, the day I had to speak out, I did speak out, you know, and maybe that's the best thing, the best teaching I can give to my son, you know.
Yeah. You said that the world is grey, and I would agree with you. We literally have in our party mission statement that every country has good things and bad things, and for Switzerland, we like to learn about these things and apply the good things if they are compatible with Switzerland.
Yeah, I would go even further. You know, we need to differentiate people and their actions. I like to, but this is my humanistic side, you know. I like to fight ideas, but not necessarily people, you know. I think people can be misled, and we need to fight their ideas. If we can dissociate the people from their ideas, we fight their ideas, but we try to respect people. You know, people are misled, you know. When I see those people, you know, fighting, they are manipulated by Western powers, and I look at them, and, you know, well, they've been misled, and you know, I think we should be more humane and try to be rational, and trying to bring some sense, you know, you know, because,
well, that's why we have the Party Proletariat Switzerland, to bring sense to our country, to the liberals, to the fake left walking around. Yeah. We're nearly hitting now the 2-hour mark.
Oh my God, 2 hours! It's, I think we good. It was a good talk.
Yeah. Are there any last remarks which you have about Israel and Palestine?
No, just I think whatever we do, it's important just to, ultimately, we need to find a solution for peace. You know, that's the most important. I mean, taking side, of course, I can have my opinions, and I think there's a lot of injustice. There's an evil movement there, you know, but ultimately we need to find peace, you know. They need to find their terms, you know, and this should be an internal affair between Israelis and Palestinians. They need to sit down and find a solution.
Yeah.
But it's not sustainable, you know. Again, if people just get into the discussion, it's just to bring more animosity, while, you know, and again, you know, I have friends Israelis, amazing people. I have friends, you know, Palestinians. You know, I just wish that we live in a world of peace, really.
Yeah, and I mean, there are many Jews which are against Zionism, which we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing is that the most Orthodox might be actually against Zionists. You know, there's a huge community in New York which is anti-Zionist. You know, I think they call the Haredi, I think, and you have a huge community in Iran. People don't know about this, but there's a huge community in Iran, a Jewish community there, and they are anti-Zionist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the problem is that we never see this. You know, it's just because it's what we call inconvenient truth. You know, it goes against the mainstream narrative.
Yeah. Okay, Angelo.
Jason, nice to talk to you.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Let's talk soon, huh?
Sure. Have a good night.
You too. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.